Dr. Lee, it is such a pleasure to connect with you. I'm a huge fan, and I have to tell you, as I was telling you before, I get a lot of books to read for the podcast, but as soon as your new book arrived, Eat to Beat Your Diet, I read it immediately. Welcome.
Thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
And so we were talking before we started recording, and you mentioned that this book was easier for you to write than your first book. Why was it this book at this time? Was it out of the changes that have occurred in our lives over the last several years coming out of the pandemic, but really talking about metabolism and ways and strategies that we can improve our metabolic health?
Well, as a fellow healthcare provider by background, one of the things that I'm sure you can relate to is that we are trained in our education to really memorize certain aspects of science that get really applicable in treatment of disease, but not so much for prevention. And yet, as we go on, we start to open our eyes to the fact that many of these diseases could be prevented in the first place. So as a scientist, as a doctor, as somebody who's, had a career as a communicator, my first book was really about unpacking the secrets of the body that protect our health. That's something I spent, 20 years helping to develop treatments to chase those diseases until I realized we should be preventing them in the first place. When I finished my first book, I really felt like there was a story that still was untold. And that untold story was not just about how do you protect your health, but how do you optimize it from wherever you are? And that's where metabolism comes in, because that is also, perhaps you'll also resonate with me on this. I know as a fellow healthcare provider is that, I think most doctors and nurses can talk about metabolism, but not so differently than how the average person can talk about metabolism who doesn't have a medical background either. We all make certain assumptions that seem like they should be true, but may not actually be true. So I decided to write a sequel. And that sequel is called Eat to Beat Your Diet, which is a trick title because it's not a diet book. It's an anti-diet book. And what it really talks about is what I'm now really passionate about, which is that if you really understand how your body works, we are all hardwired with a metabolism that serves us our entire lives. And what happens over the course of everyday existence for most of us is that we wind up actually crushing and derailing and actually injuring our hardwired metabolism. And then people wind up throwing up their hands saying, I don't know what to do now. And this book is really about what is actually happening in your body, how should it actually operate, and how can we actually make steps to restore it back to its hardwired level.
I think it's really important for people to understand this because I think the common misnomer, and research suggests otherwise, is that our metabolism slows as we get older. And you talk about in the book about the fact that from the age of 20 to 60, our metabolism is quite stable. But yet most people have the assumption, and clinicians included, that once you get north of 40 years old, or as women get closer to menopause or men andropause, that all of a sudden the brakes go on. And actually the research doesn't support this.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things that I as a research scientist, I live for jaw-dropping moments in science, right? I mean, that's basically whether you're in a lab or you're doing clinical research, what every research scientist actually tells the tale of is like, I was doing this and then this discovery happened and this light bulb went off and I'm like, geez, like if this, then this must be true. And it's exciting. I mean, so my passion for metabolism was truly ignited, set on fire, really just about 2 years ago, while I was in the middle of writing this book and asking questions about metabolism, when a discovery was made, which has really changed the way that we understand human metabolism. So here's where the research study. Research study was done with 6,000 people over 20 countries, and was led by a group of several dozen researchers that were asking the question about human metabolism and what should it be, right? So think about it, like the average person, like, well, I'm this tall and I weigh this much, and this is how much I should be eating. This is how many calories. That's dieting, right? So I was writing a book about how do you beat your diet? How do you not need a diet? So that led me to say, well, how does metabolism work? Well, that's where this research study came into play. By the way, it was actually the research was headquartered at the International Atomic Energy Center in Switzerland. And what they did, this was a global study, They studied people that were 6,000 people that ranged from 2 days old to 95 years old. That's the entire human lifespan. Okay. And what they did is they studied everyone's metabolism in the exact same way. And the way they did this, and the reason that it was atomic in terms of its headquarters, its sponsors, is because they gave everybody a drink of water. Water is H2O, 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, and they tweaked the atoms so you can actually measure them. And that means that whether you gave a baby some very safe water to drink, or gave an elderly person safe water to drink, or anybody in between, you could actually measure these tweaked atoms in their breath, in their urine, or in their blood. Now, imagine this: 6,000 people studied in exactly the same way. And then what they did is, when they looked at the results of by measuring that, you actually get a sense of metabolism. You get a measure of metabolism. By measuring that, they found that, not surprisingly, everybody's metabolism is all over the map, just like you'd expect. Just like people pull their hair out and say, "Oh my gosh, I don't know why my sister was so lucky; she was born with a fast metabolism, and I was not lucky because I was born with a slow one. That's why I struggle with weight, and she can eat anything." Right? That's the standard kind of trope that everybody. It's a myth. Really, and it turns out to be an urban legend, because when they looked at all the data and it was all scattered, they did one ingenious thing. And this is something that really, I think, modern technology allows us to do. They were able to develop an algorithm that removed from this data cloud the effect of excess body fat, based on the body size, based on the sex, based on everything else. And when they did that, which, over 6,000 people, you need high technology to be able to really put this into place. So 20 years ago, there's no way we could have done this research. But when they removed out of this, this confusing cloud of data of metabolism everywhere, they removed the effect of excess body fat. What they found was jaw-dropping to me. They found that human beings are hardwired to all go through only 4 stages of metabolism across the entire lifespan. 0 to 1, metabolism shoots sky high, about 50% higher than the adult. Phase 2, stage 2, is 1-year-old to 20 years old. So you're going down, 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 down. During adolescence, when teenagers are sprouting up and eating 2 dinners and bouncing off the walls, I used to think, this is what I was taught, well, their metabolism's going up. I just got to feed it. And actually, it's not true. Their metabolism is going down, down, down. They're actually getting bigger and they're flushing out, but their metabolism is hardwired to go down. And then from 20 to 60, it is almost rock stable. That's through pregnancy, that's through menopause, andropause, as you said, rock stable. And that was shocking, because what that means is that 60 is the new 20. Right? So if you choose it to be, that's how your body wants it to be. And then from 60 to 90, your metabolism does slow down slightly. When you're 90, your metabolism is about 17% slower than it was at 60 or at 20. All right. And that's it. That's how we're wired. But when they added the fat back into the system, what they found is that these 4 patterns of metabolism, these 4 stages, got crushed by the effect of excess body fat. So it's not the metabolism we were born with that causes us to gain body fat and therefore gain weight. Actually, the other way around. We are hardwired to have a certain metabolism, and as we gain extra weight, develop extra body fat from behavior, from hormones, from all kinds of life circumstances, that excess body fat sits on our metabolism and basically, in many people, derails it. And so the good news is that makes it something that we can do something about, because we actually have the ability to unleash our inner metabolism.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, and certainly flies in opposition to everything I learned as a nurse and a nurse practitioner. But let's talk more about fat, because I think people think of fat as fat, but it's actually a highly sophisticated endocrine organ. And in your book, you talk specifically about 3 different types of hormones. I think most people are probably familiar with leptin, but 2 others that are probably less known. But the interplay between these vis-a-vis adipose tissue is fascinating.
Yeah, well, so leptin is sort of the satiety hormone. It actually lowers our appetite, but people make a mistake about thinking like it's an off switch. It's not. It's really a volume switch. So just like when you're driving a car, or maybe your kid's driving in a car, they turn the radio out really loud, and you want to turn down. That's basically how all of these hormones actually work, but especially leptin. And so basically, it's the volume switch between our stomach and our brain. and it's influenced by a lot of other things, but basically it's like, hey, we're getting kind of full, time to slow it down. And if you eat slowly and your stomach actually, and your body fat actually produces leptin, it signals to your brain. It's kind of a text message to the brain that says, hey, slow it down. And that's why, if you gobble down your Thanksgiving dinner, all right, and you wolf it down, you'll eat 2, maybe 3 servings, and you're going to feel like crap afterwards. I mean, we've all done it, all right? But if you eat slowly and, think about how in the Mediterranean, they tell you, or in Asia, how they tell you to savor your food. Eat smaller quantities, enjoy it, eat more diversely. When you eat slowly, that text message has a chance to be sent to the brain. The brain is able to slowly reach over to the volume button and start to tweak it a little bit so that it is actually happening at the right time. You tend not to overeat. It's harder to overeat when you give yourself time. And so leptin is one of those hormones that actually controls that. There's another one that's actually, these are all, by the way, produced by body fat, these hormones. This is why it's an endocrine organ, like your thyroid, like your adrenal gland, like your pituitary. Another one is called adiponectin. Now, adiponectin, most people may or may not have heard about it, but, this term adipose really refers to fat tissue. Most people don't know this, but adipem, which is where adipose comes from, is Latin for lard, pig fat. And it's because for 10,000 years, human beings have been, eating fat from pig. And in the old, like back in the Stone Age, eating fat actually was part of energy. And that's the other key thing that I write about, which is that we should not fear or we should not fear fat, nor should we actually hate it. We should respect it, and we should tame our fat. It's like that German Shepherd. When it's a really nice shepherd, like you love your dog, but when there's an untamed dog, like it can be nasty, right? Like just hard to live with in the house and hard for anybody to visit your house. Same deal with our fat. You want to actually have a well-controlled tame fat. So adiponectin, which is also made by fat, actually is, by the way, one of the it's a hormone in the blood that is present like 1,000 times higher than most other hormones in your body. It's important because it actually is part of our metabolism that allows our cells to absorb fuel. And so when adiponectin is high, it basically allows our cells to be very sensitive to insulin, which is the hormone that allows us to absorb energy, glucose and other forms of energy from carbs, et cetera, into our cells so that we can power ourselves. It's kind of like it's the fuel nozzle that allows our car engine to actually work. So that's a very important hormone to recognize as well. It's actually really good. Some foods can actually turn up, turn down leptin, turn up or turn down adiponectin. And then one other one is called resistin. Now resistin does exactly what it sounds like. It resists. And just like the rest of our body's a bunch of checks and balances. They're not on and off switches. And, for people who tend to follow diets, my book is an anti-diet book, but people who tend to follow diets, they're all into, all in or all out, and that's basically why you yo-yo all over the place. Bottom line is that our body's a bunch of checks and balances. It's a gigantic yin and yang. And when adiponectin is absorbing energy, you sometimes need to create a little resistance to counter it. You got one foot on the gas pedal and one foot on the brake. And that way you can make the whole trip that way. And that's really the trip of our metabolism is gas pedal and brake, and these kinds of concepts are really important. The fact that our body fat makes these hormones that control our metabolism means that we don't want to get rid of all of our body fat. You don't want to cut it out, suck it out, artificially burn it out. Nor do you, like a big deal right now is actually to use drugs to interfere with that text message to your brain so you don't even feel hungry. That's like smashing with a hammer the fuel gauge on your car. You have no idea if you need more fuel. To me, I think that what we want to do is respect how the body controls our metabolism. Metabolism is all based on fuel. Fuel in your body is like fuel you run in your car.
Well, because you talked about this, I'm actually going to ask your opinion about semaglutide and Ozempic. These are these new drugs that are out that are interfering with this communication so that people feel satiated. They don't want to eat as much. Maybe they get a little constipated. It slows their gut motility. What are your personal feelings, or are you prescribing these drugs for your patient population?
Yeah, well, so look, first of all, I mean, as a medical doctor, as an MD, who's actually been involved with developing new biotech drugs for cancer, diabetes and its complications, and also vision loss, among other health conditions, I'm a big believer in using the right medicine for the right situation and the right person at the right time. Um, I totally understand that there may be dire situations in which a prescription weight loss drug could be exactly the right thing to do for a patient. What I think is that our body is complex enough and hardwired in wonderful ways that unless you're in that dire position, reaching for that prescription drug, or as a doctor, writing that prescription drug, often at the request of the patient, is just not the best way and probably not the right way to do it either. I think that, if you think about it, like we live our lives without medication. We have to eat, we have to move, we have to sleep, we have to manage our stress levels. All those things are important for keeping us healthy. And there are times when we actually need assistance. And sometimes you need to supplement whatever your body can do. That's the role of supplements in my body. It's topping off something that you can't get or you don't get enough of. And then once you go beyond that, look, pharmaceuticals are life-saving. If you take a look at how people lived to 40 years old, 100 years ago. And so I take nothing for granted. I think there can be instances in which these prescription drugs, which are quite powerful and also have some powerful side effects, are completely appropriate. But that needs to be the decision between a doctor and a patient, and ideally a doctor who is adequately informed and has really thought through things. And by the way, while we're on this topic, this is another big challenge that I think patients face all around the world, which is that the people that you're supposed to trust, the doctors, nurses, who are advising you, that you trust your life to in almost every other circumstance, childbirth, managing your heart attack, getting a heart transplant, they're not adequately educated about diet, metabolism, and so what winds up happening is that patients become consumers of information, and they will go for whatever they can get, rightfully so. Okay, we're all self-sufficient to look for stuff, but there's no filter and no way to tell what's really credible. Like you and I are rooted in working on credible information and credible science, but that's not true for everyone, and or all the sources of information. So I think that's one of the big challenges is educating the healthcare community so that they're also able to actually communicate clearly. So obviously, what you do and what I do, we're one step in the right direction, but there's a lot of other health professionals that also need to step up to the plate.
I could not agree more. And while we're kind of talking about fat, I find it fascinating that there are a lot of gender differences, which I think for many people, the way that a woman's body habitus or a man's ends up looking is driven by changes during puberty and other life changes. So let's talk about some of the changes that are occurring in fat distribution as we are getting older. So north of 40 into our 50s and beyond, what changes with fat deposition?
Yeah, well, so one of the things I talk about in Eat to Beat Your Diet, the first third of the book is really new discoveries and things you need to know about metabolism and about body fat. Both are completely able to be controlled by actions that we can take. Both are working on our behalf most of the time. They should be, and both are really under our control, right? So let's talk about body fat for a second. Before we talk about what happens in middle age and above, let's talk about some amazing things about body fat that occur long before you worry about it. And that is, body fat begins when you're in the womb. So when your dad's sperm met your mom's egg and they kind of combined and started to create little ball of cells and started to create the shape of a human, some of the first tissues that form are blood vessels, because we need a good circulation for every organ that forms, nerves that also form, and nerves run along with blood vessels. And the third tissue that forms is fat, adipose tissue. So we've got little globules of fat. You had fat long before you had a face to feed it, number one. Number two is that fat actually surrounds blood vessels and also is connected to nerves. And remember, we just talked a little bit earlier about this. It's a endocrine organ. It produces hormones that supports the function of our organs that are going to form later on. So this is way before you're even born. Number two, when you're born, think about it. Every culture in the world, every country in the world will appreciate the wonderful sight of a newborn, pudgy, chubby. They've got arms and legs that look like the balloon animals that you twist, right? Big chubby cheeks, right? And in fact, fat in babies is something that we can associate with health. Look at how cute that baby is, right? If you actually saw a baby at birth that looked like a fashion model, chiseled jaw, thin, thick arms and legs, you'd be really worried with that baby, and you'd be right. You'd think there was something wrong with that baby. And so, number one, like just from the get-go, got to realize that fat actually has a role long before you peek at it in a mirror or step on a scale. And that's really a wonderful thing. And what happens is that as we grow up from that pudgy little baby, our fat starts to redistribute in ways. Now, boys and girls, actually, when you're 5, 7, 8, actually all track along pretty similarly. And the three kinds of fat, which is, subcutaneous fat, which is subcutaneous under the skin, close, you can see it, visceral fat, which we need some of, inside our gut. Viscera means gut. So the fat in our gut, and also some brown fat, which we can talk about, which is a third kind of fat. Most visceral fat and subcutaneous fat, the subcutaneous fat is the muffin, all right, in your waistline. Visceral fat you can't see. That's the yellow stuff hanging off the chicken when you actually open it up, all right? And then brown fat is something that we only really started to appreciate actually exists in humans. It is paper thin, and it's not close to the skin. You can't see it. It's close to the bone. It's paper thin, and it's around your neck. It's behind your breastbone. It's under your arms, a little bit in your back, a little bit in your belly, and they all form different things. But when we're kids, we actually, boys and girls, the genders are kind of convergent. They're forming differently, but that's why little boys and little girls kind of look the same. You go to a grade school, you could dress the kids exactly the same way, and if it wasn't for the length of the hair, they'd look at a distance exactly the same. What happens in junior high school with puberty? Hormones start pouring out, and now the gender specifics start to really flesh themselves out. Boys actually tend to start growing more visceral fat, which is the harmful fat. Now, it's not harmful until it becomes harmful, but we tend to get, as a male, we tend to start building more gut fat. You can't see that gut fat, but our waistline starts to enlarge, right? It's like just putting a lot of meat in a sausage casing. It's going to get a fatter sausage, all right? The female gender starts to distribute fat differently around the hips, around the thighs, around the butt, eventually around breast tissue, right? And so you wind up actually starting to see this wonderful distribution. This was the fascination and the focus of some of the Renaissance artists capturing the wonderful human form, and differentiating, the male and the female figure. If you went to Rome, or you went to the Louvre, or just went online to look at paintings, some of the most famous paintings of the world, the Michelangelo's paintings, you'll see this being captured in its idealistic form. All right. Now, what happens when we actually get, and don't forget, metabolism goes up, then it comes down, then it's rock stable. Now, what happens during that rock stable part is really getting to that age period that you're talking about. Like, what happens during middle age? Well, you know what? Actually, 100 years ago, we never made it beyond middle age. People just didn't make it beyond 40. But now that we're living longer and we're getting more comfortable and we have more resources around us and we are surrounded by abundance of food, abundance of ultra processed food, abundance of soda, abundance of couches and chairs and cars and laptop screens and things that don't make us as physically active, and lifestyles that make us stressed out, right? Complex relationships, lots of stress from disease, economy, war. I mean, think about all the things that have come into modern human existence. I'm talking about decades ago. You want to talk about the last few years? Yeah, it's been like in sharp focus then. All these things contribute to our brain, which is one of the most important organs to allow us to make the best possible decisions. And a lot of the things that were surrounded us trick us into making not so good decisions. And so what you wrote your book about and what I wrote my book about is really about what's the underlying principle that one should think about to make better decisions. And so the reason that we wind up growing the muffin at age 40 and above, and the beer gut, and the reason that the double chin and the floppy arms and the big thighs, and the thing that look, this happens to everyone if you're not careful, and it's about being mindful. All of us. I'm not a great big person, but I can tell you, I'm sure everyone who's watching will have experienced this as well. You step out of the shower in the morning, and out of the corner of your eye, you glance at the mirror, and you see something you didn't expect to see or you don't want to see. Then what's the next thing you do? You step on the scale. And whatever that number is, probably a number that you didn't want to see. All right. So then what do? You're like, oh man, I got to eat better. I got to work out. I got to exercise more. And then that's the cycle. Then you start reaching for extreme things and that are being fed to us by the media. And what I think we need to do is to come right back down to basics, to recognize our body is hardwired in a particular way. We should be eating in sensible ways that, like, our world provided for us. And we need to sort of try to filter out some of this distraction that's out there. And by being aware and mindful, we can actually help our own bodies fight excess body fat, let our inner metabolism come to the surface, lower inflammation in our body, and also take advantage of all those useful bioactives found in foods, mostly plant-based, but not exclusively, that actually allow us to get in better shape. And that's just the food part. The whole idea of activity, sleep, stress management are also incredibly important. So there's no one solution fix all.
Well, and I think that's really important because we've been so heavily influenced by not only the processed food industry, but also the media that will hang on to a cherry-picked study that they then extrapolate. I mean, I'm sure this happens to you and your team on social media. There'll be a cherry-picked study or some article that comes out, and people all of a sudden they're not sure. They're almost paralyzed, not feeling confident in their decision to lean into eating more plants or having more meat or doing more physical activity or intermittent fasting, any of these strategies, but they are designed to not just be focusing on one, it's all of these things. And I love that you really speak about slowing down, how important mindset is, because understanding our autonomic nervous system and being in the parasympathetic, the rest and repose side of our brain is really the way our bodies are optimized to eat. Most of us are eating on the go. We're eating standing up. We're eating off our kids' plates. We're not eating at all. We're then coming home and, eating half of our refrigerator because we're so hungry. How do you think our kind of modern day lifestyles have contributed to the degree of metabolic disease that we're looking at right now? I know obviously broken metabolisms are likely a byproduct of a lot of the lifestyle choices that we're making and the hyper palatable foods that we're consuming.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What a big statement to unpack. But, I think that if you take a look at all the research studies in totality, the ones that actually look at how our modern life has affected our health universally show. There are no studies that show eating excess ultra processed food or having inactivity, being the couch potato, or having poor quality sleep actually do anything beneficial to our health. In fact, quite the opposite. They show that, in fact, there's degradation of our health. And now we're beginning to understand why, because the science is now, the new science of the metabolism, which is what I write about in Eat to Beat Your Diet, teaches us that we're hardwired to function in a very particular way. And if we take care of how we actually operate, or our metabolism operates, we'll last a long time. And, I try to bring things down into analogies and explanations that people understand. You buy a car, doesn't matter if it's expensive or inexpensive. The bottom line is you got an engine. You need to run that engine. You need to have good quality fuel in order to run that engine, and how you treat your engine and the quality of the fuel that you use and how you drive that car. If you drive it hard if you take care of it, if you are mindful of how you're driving the car, can make all the difference between, look, in the very beginning, it's going to drive great. Everyone's going to actually have that same highway feel. You can take it on off-roading and you're probably okay. You'll just have the same experience. But if you start to mistreat your car over a long period of time and feed it crappy quality fuel, put in the lowest quality oil or don't put any oil in at all, run it too fast, don't change your brakes. I mean, you just get in there and abuse your car. To some extent, that's what our modern life has done to us. They've so distracted us and so detached us from our inner selves that we're basically just ruining our vehicles. And so as a result, we're not lasting as long. And by the way, if you take a look at these so-called blue zones, right? Like it's got a lot of popularity. These are the 5, probably more zones around the world where people are unusually healthy and they live unusually long periods of time. There's something mystique. There's some mystique about how they live. I'm going to actually invite the listeners and viewers to consider something else. Let's turn that upside down. Maybe they're just living modern life in a simpler way that we should all emulate, there's nothing mysterious about it. In fact, they're just not burdening their existence with all the things that are distracting and cluttering up our lives. If we could Maria Kondo our lives and our diets and keep things simple, we probably would all have the opportunity to be our own blue zone. And I think that that's something that is empowering to think about. Everyone needs a spring cleaning. And I think when it comes to the metabolism, starting with your diet is actually a really great way.
I would totally wholeheartedly agree. And you talk in the book quite a bit about the impact of the gut microbiome and how that can be tied to body fat. And specific to that, one particular organism that we're starting to hear more about, Akkermansia. Can we talk about the interplay between the gut microbiome and our metabolism and this very important, organism that many people may be unfamiliar with?
Okay. Everyone's probably by now heard about gut health and thought about gut health. If this isn't something that you've heard about, ask a friend or a family member. They'll start rambling on about everything about it. Okay. Here's the thing. Gut health in scientific terms and medical terms relates a lot, refers to, our gut microbiome. And our gut microbiome is really the bacteria that is mostly in the last part of our gut. It's an area in the colon called the cecum. And although not all of our body's healthy bacteria is there, a lot of it is. What's a lot? 39 trillion bacteria. That's a lot of bacteria. Our body is only made of 40 trillion cells. So we're about 50-50 bacteria and and the other 50% is human. All right. And so what we realized is, and again, I'll confess this as a bona fide MD who went through medical school, is that when I went to medical school, and you probably had the same thing, Cynthia, is that I was taught that bacteria are bad, must kill bacteria, and now must memorize all the bacteria you must kill with prescription antibiotics that are necessary in order to stay clean and healthy. Well, turns out that's all like a little bit misemphasized, because most bacteria that we encounter throughout our lives are good bacteria. Almost all of them are good bacteria. And we do encounter a few bad guys, I mean, think about it. It's like saying that the way that the medical community was trained is like, everyone's a terrorist, must kill terrorists. But in fact, actually, most people are good guys. Most people are ordinary, peace-loving citizens. And yeah, there's a few, bad actors out there. We do want to make sure that we're keeping an eye out for them, right? So it's really, what's amazing to me is how modern science is teaching us to upend a lot of the traditional teachings that the medical community actually has been saddled with over the decades. So gut microbiome are healthy bacteria living in our gut. There's a lot of different bacteria, not only bacteria, by the way, there's always also viruses. There's also fungi. There's also another type of small organism that most people don't talk about, don't even know about, called archaea. That's another kind of member of the gut garden that's out there, but let's not go there right now. I'll tell you about the bacteria. We're just beginning to understand the importance of the gut microbiome. And we do know that the bacteria in our gut talks through the wall of our intestines, because they're living inside our intestines. They talk to our immune system, and they talk to our immune system right through the wall of the bacteria. It's like I would say it's like college roommates in a dorm with really thin walls. And basically the bacteria, which is one roommate, pounding on the wall to the roommate, basically saying, hey, what kind of pizza do you want? All right. And then the roommate can hear on the other side and shouts back, I like mushroom or olives. And basically our bacteria and our immune system talk to each other that way. And good, healthy gut bacteria give good instructions to our immune system. And this is really kind of an eye-opener to realize that our immune system is so tightly connected. And when our gut bacteria is not healthy, not only is our immunity, our defense is down for immunity, but our inflammation, which is another part of our immune system, goes up. And the gut bacteria not only influences our immune system, but also influences our metabolism. It influences our lipid, cholesterol and lipid levels in our body. The inflammation actually is really important to control, because if we've got extra body fat, basically we've got actually a smoldering fire burning in our body. Okay, and it's our healthy gut bacteria that puts out that smoldering fire. Like we put out that forest fires, prevent it from becoming a wildfire. We need good, healthy gut bacteria. And most people have not until recently paid attention to their gut. So, and we've all been through this before. Like when you're feeling okay, and then one week you're not feeling okay, you're gassy, you're crampy, you're not regular, or you're having loose stools, and you're just not feeling that good. You're not talking about it to people mostly. Okay. That means that you don't have good gut health. And most likely there's something going on with your gut bacteria. We are just beginning to actually understand that we got to pay attention to that. Now, a lot of people out there say that they've got a solution. Do my stool test and get my probiotic. And what I will tell you is that we don't understand enough about it yet to come up with a definitive solution. However, there are certain bacteria that are very, very interesting. One of them is called Akkermansia muciniphila. Akkermansia, Akkermansia. That's the first name. The last name, the genus and species, is muciniphila. Muciniphila because it actually likes to live in the mucus of your gut. Now, I learned about Akkermansia muciniphila not in a metabolism setting, not in a diabetes or an obesity setting, but actually in a cancer setting, because I do cancer research. A few years ago, I was with a colleague of mine, Dr. Laurent Zipvogel, who discovered in cancer patients getting immune therapy, treatments that actually activate our body's own immune system to fight the cancer, that the people who responded well, whose immune system could be coached by the treatment to go out and destroy their own cancer, people who survived, actually had Akkermansia. And the people who unfortunately didn't respond, meaning their immune system did not respond, couldn't be coached by the immunotherapy, lacked this one particular gut bacteria, Akkermansia muciniphila. So that's really interesting. One bacteria could make the difference between whether you lived or died as a cancer patient with a particular kind of treatment. To me, like my radar went up right away, like, oh my gosh, we got to figure out more about this. And the more we actually discovered about this, so what Laurent Zipvogel did, she took out the Akkermansia from these responders, cancer patient survivors, and took them to the lab and gave them to lab animals that were developing cancer and gave those lab animals immunotherapy. And so they would respond if they had the Akkermansia from the patient. And then she gave them antibiotics to wipe out the Akkermansia, and the cancer grew right back and killed the animals. So just like the patients. And so this was I think 2017. And now the research has continued to evolve. Now we're finding that it's not just cancer, okay, which is not about cancer. It's really about the immune system, our own health defenses. But another defense is really about able to tame our adipose tissue and our metabolism. People with good metabolisms have more Akkermansia. People with, and this is actually a really strange observation. So I'm a scientist. So, one of the important things about scientists is you can tell somebody's a real scientist when they tell you they don't know something, all right? So here's what we don't know, but what we observed. People who are suffering from obesity actually have hardly any or no Akkermansia in their gut. People that are lean with good metabolisms actually have Akkermansia. So this is an observation that we need to pay attention to. How come one group doesn't have Akkermansia? Is it a cause or an effect? What is Akkermansia doing? Well, it looks like Akkermansia may be controlling the lipids, might be influencing the inflammation, really, really being helpful. And so then the question is, how do you grow your own Akkermansia? Okay. Well, it turns out that there are certain foods containing polyphenols, like pomegranate juice, that contain elagitanins, is the bioactive, that doesn't act directly on the bacteria, the Akkermansia. It prompts your gut to secrete more mucus. There's more soil for the Akkermansia to grow. So it's basically like a gardener saying, how do I put more fertilizer for my flower bed to bloom, my annuals to bloom? So pomegranate juice, Concord grape juice, cranberry juice have all been studied. They all have this elagitannin. More mucus, the more mucus there is, the better the Akkermansia grows. And I can tell you, I had a patient I once was treating who had cancer. She was about to get an immunotherapy for her cancer, multiple myeloma, and I told the oncologist, hold off for a second, because let's test her stool to see if she have Akkermansia. This is as a result of my knowing, my work, my knowing about Lawrence Zivogle's work. And so we tested her stool. She had 0 Akkermansia. Why? Because her kids had bronchitis. It went right through the house. She had gotten some antibiotics from, a walk-in clinic, and she had no Akkermansia. So I said, wait, let's grow some back. So we gave her pomegranate juice. We tried to really give her some fermented foods to really make her gut health better. We needed more mucus. We needed more gut health, more probiotics, some prebiotics, probiotics. Then we tested her again a few weeks later, and she had 6 times above the general population's worth of Akkermansia. So if you're missing it, I'm telling you, diet can actually grow it back, which is a wonderful thing. And when we actually gave her the immunotherapy, she actually responded completely, like one of the best responders ever seen in history. So I'm telling you, this is not food versus medicine. In this case, it's food and medicine, or food before medicine. And it's really about the body and the wonderful things that we can do to feed our body's health defenses, feed our body's metabolism. It's all stuff that's inside us.
Well, it makes so much sense. And I love that it's tangible. It's not an unusual thing that people have to go purchase to be able to support their gut microbiome. Now, I want to be respectful of your time, but I would love to kind of focus in on some of your favorite foods. You do a beautiful job in the book, really talking about specific foods and compounds that can be very, very beneficial for helping support metabolism. And then briefly touch on the Mediterranean kind of concept, which is so aligned. I grew up with an Italian mother, and, food was savored, and you took long meals. There was no rushing around, but let's touch on those things. And the other piece that I want to compliment you on is that I read so many books for the podcast, and sometimes there are intangible things, but you do such a nice job of describing the food item and exactly the amount that you need to consume. So you're not wandering around saying, are you talking about a cup of something, or is it a tablespoon? You're very specific about your recommendations.
Yeah, no, well, thank you for your kind words. Look, I'm somebody who really grew up like you around really delicious food. I grew up in the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where there's a lot of ethnic communities, and I went to these folk festivals where we got to sample a lot of things. Look, we all come from different places. We all have our own origin stories in terms of every culture in the world has its own food story and food traditions, and I love that. I really respect that. And one of the things in my research, I talk about that in our food ingredients, there are these compounds that might be tongue twisters for people to pronounce: lycopene, chlorogenic acid, zeaxanthin, beta-cryptoxanthin. I could go on and on. Allicin, hydroxytyrosol. They're all in the book if you want to read about them. But what's important is that they're all found in our foods. They're found in things like tomatoes and apples and pears and garlic and scallions and garlic scapes and lots of seafood as well, including the omega-3 fatty acids. And what I try to do is sort of take away some of the mystery. Look, Mother Nature is very clever and incredible. She has gifted us with so many healthy natural chemicals that activate our body's health defenses, that help us tame our metabolism and fight body fat. So they're in there. So what are some of the favorite foods? Well, in my book, I wanted to do something that I know a lot of diet books don't. And I wanted to take people on a tour of the plain old grocery store, the way that I go through it, and take them on a tour to point out the things that I see as you go around. Go to the produce section, which is usually the first section. What am I seeing? I'm seeing tomatoes. I'm seeing brassica vegetables. I'm seeing the broccoli, the kale. I'm seeing the bok choy, the baby bok choy. Then I'm seeing the mushrooms, and I'm seeing the red onions. And I talk about all these things and try to provide a little bit of, underneath the hood, give a little clue into how do we know it's good for you? And one of the things that I really do that you just pointed out, Cynthia, is I point out the human evidence. What is the clinical study? The lab study is interesting, especially the scientists, but the human study is what people care about. And in the human study, you always have a dose, an amount, a frequency, just like any medicine, which is food is medicine. So I publish that around. So every food that I talk about, or almost every food, I should talk about the doses. So what's interesting is like pears. Pears actually have been able to reduce waist circumference. How does it do it? By shrinking the visceral fat, the harmful fat, the gut fat. It's kind of like a baseball glove that's like packing or squeezing your organs. And in a study that was done to show that you can lose like 2 inches around your waist circumference by eating pears. How much did they give? 2 medium-sized pears before lunch for 12 weeks. And they even tell you what kind of pears. Okay, there were Bartlett pears and Anjou pears. Hey, these are the things that you see in the grocery store. So I literally take people through the produce section, and I go to the seafood section because this is a whole other podcast, probably, like things that people are not comfortable with, fish and seafood, like I didn't go around fish. I don't like fish. Look, there are so many incredible, delicious, amazing seafoods to enjoy. And I'll come back to that with Mediterranean, that I actually spent a whole chapter diving into things that you'd recognize and a lot of seafood I'm willing to bet you don't recognize, like the mitten crab or the mantis shrimp. These are things that are out there. I really want to punch through the brick wall and show you that there's a lot of stuff that you haven't discovered yet. When I demystify that and tell you the dose of that to eat as well. And then, of course, the forbidden middle aisle. I wanted the people to say, you know what, it's time to grow up and get out of this, this elimination thing. Don't even go to the middle aisle. Wrong. I call my chapters in the book, Eat to Beat Your Diet, is called Treasure Hunt. Go into the middle aisle with your bucket, your cart, to hunt for the treasures that help your metabolism, like navy beans, like lentils, like extra virgin olive oil, like apple cider vinegar, like dried prunes, like dried mushrooms and chili pepper powder and turmeric. I mean, there's all these things that, I'm trying to let people know that this is every day. Anybody can do this. This is not mystery. And this isn't about elimination. This is actually encouragement to dive right in and find the thing that fits you. So what fits me? I always get asked this question, Dr. Lee, you write about food and health, you're a food as medicine researcher. What diet are you on? And I tell people I'm not on a diet, but I do have a way that I eat. In my way, I call Mediterranean. I'm Asian. I grew up in a Chinese family. I had lots of Asian food. I also spent a gap year in the Mediterranean before I went to medical school. I lived in Italy. I lived in Greece. And then after that, I went to China. And what I was interested in doing on those gap years is to study food, culture, and health. And so to me, what's really wonderful is that there is a beautiful way that these natural ingredients, whether you know the chemical names or not, have been incorporated into recipes. And they're easy to find on the internet. Many of them are traditional. Your grandmother and her grandmother were making these foods, okay? Natural, fresh, local, seasonal, all that stuff that you hear about that sounds trendy, and cooking them and sharing them and eating them that contain fiber. They may be fermented. They have these polyphenols in ways that everyone can enjoy and savor without wolfing your food down. And, if you went to a traditional household eating, like in Italy or Greece, and somebody watched you wolfing food down, they'd hit you with a spoon because you're not supposed to eat that way, right? And I think that this is really what I talk about. Mediterranean is going back to the basics, becoming reconnected with the traditions of some of the healthiest cuisines in the world, and appreciating the fact that these are delicious foods that you can really love your food, to love your metabolism, and to love your health all at the same time. That's what my book is about.
Well, I'm so grateful for this opportunity to connect with you. My listeners know that I always am very transparent. I think your book is the first book I've read in 2023 that is going to be a must read. Please let my listeners know how to connect with you, how to find you on social media, get to your book, etc.
Yeah, well, anybody who wants to buy my book, you can get it anywhere books are sold. If you want to actually find out more about me, you can come to my website at drwilliamlee.com, drwilliamlee.com. And I'm on social at Dr. William Lee, Dr. William Lee. I've gotten a newsletter that I always put new research information on it. I do master classes that are free. We've done all around the world. People from all around the country, all around the world actually attend these things. And I also teach for people who are like serious and hardcore, some online courses if you're interested. But more importantly, and most importantly, I want people to actually find me and realize that I actually really enjoy my food. And my message is that really try to enjoy yourself. You can enjoy your life, enjoy your food. Don't fear it, enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Hey, if you like this video, you guys are going to love this video, and I'll see you there.